to our preview lesson of Varga 2, the subtle Varga charts, the subtle divisional charts. I'm Barry Rosen. Many of you know me from my newsletter and blogs and YouTube channel. And many of you are my students, and some of you are thinking of taking this course. So this is actually the first lesson. So I'm actually going to give an overview of the D3, which is called the Divisional, and the D12, and the D20, and the D40-45. I'm not going to talk about the D30, but that is part of the course. And I will also give some information on some of the new things in the class for my continuing students, and those of you who are thinking about continuing. Let's see. Again, I have to thank a lot of people who came before me with this material, particularly Camilla Sutton, G.K. Gohl, Sanjay Roth, and Hank Friedman. I can be reached at Barry2 at appliedvedicastrology.com, or my office number is there. I do see texts maybe once a day or maybe twice a week on Facebook under Barry Rosen, but it's not the best way to reach me. I do answer my email right away. Today, I tend to lecture more. If I get tired, I sometimes will pause and take questions. Those of you who are on the panelist mode can unmute your mics and ask questions when I give you a break. And generally, if you take my classes, I send the PowerPoints ahead of time for you to study, and then we'll usually have a talk. Those of you know about my last book, it's on Amazon in hard copy, Finding Your Blind Spots Using Vedic Astrology. I tend to be more interested in the psychology and spiritual orientation of Vedic astrology, although certainly I know how to do prediction, but I always want to move Vedic astrology beyond fortune telling. And if you read my book, you'll see, my strong psychological orientation. And again, for those of you who don't know much about Vargas, I've written some articles to kind of help you with that. They allow microscopic analysis because two twins born with 50 minutes apart actually have two different lives, and you can see the difference in their D60 chart, which changes every 2 minutes. But the other Vargas, if you have a friend who was born in the same day, in the same year, in the same city, your lives are very different. There's genetic karma. There's, so to me, Vargas are like reading DNA strands, and particularly when I talk about ancestral karma today, that will be clearer. And we start with some Vedic prayers. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Vakratunda Mahakaya, Suryakoti Samaprapa, Nirviyam Kurame Deva, Sarvakareshi Sarvada, Jnanamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Padam, Mantramulam Guru Vakyam, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa, Om Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai, Tejasvinava Titamastu Ma Vivishivahai, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, Om Aditya Samaya Mangala Buraya Cha, Guru Shukrashini Bischa Rahave, Ketave Namaha, honoring the great ones Lord Krishna, Goddess Saraswati, Vedavyasa, and my spiritual tradition, and all my great judges, teachers. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the course. I'm going to turn my fan down first. Okay, so I kind of subtitled this course because a lot of it's about ancestral karma, looking at the D12 for parents. Any of the D3 also covers brothers and siblings, and D40 and D45 for maternal and paternal ancestral karma. And you know, families are so important, and we'll talk a lot about that today because they have a strong impact in who we are, and we're still connected to our ancestors. All the traditions around the world have days to honor ancestors. In the Vedic tradition, there's 2 weeks before the 9 days of Mother Divine, where ceremonies are performed for the ancestors. It's thought that they're closer to the earth, but the ancestors are there on the subtle levels, and we can kind of connect with them. And it's important to honor them, and you know, talk a little bit about that. There will be some new things in Varga too for my continuing students. We'll do a little bit on Shadbala, which I'll talk about today, which is divisional strength. So sometimes we'll see this in Bill Clinton's chart. You know, he has such a strong sun in all his divisional charts that, you know, it's not shocking that he's a leader. So sometimes when you have strong planets in, you know, in a divisional chart, which you can see through these mathematical calculations that Parashar gave us, we see hidden strengths, sometimes weaknesses in the chart too. We're going to spend a lot of time on Dreshana. Dreshana, even though it's got a K in it, it's pronounced Dreshana. It's very important for not just siblings, but for health and sexuality, connected to the 3rd house. Really could have a whole course on Dreshana. It's so important. So I'm going to at least do 3 lessons, and then we'll get into ancestral karma. And then there's a lot of Ayurvedic astrology in this class because we have to start moving into the D27, the D30, and the D3. Trimshamsha is a very fascinating chart for discussing mental blocks to health, because the subtle Vargas are connected to the subtle bodies. So the D27, D30 are connected more to the causal bodies, and consequently they connect to our belief structures. And if we have, you know, all disease kind of starts on the belief level. So if we have problems, if we start thinking that we're going to be sick, we can become sick. But sometimes the astrology first hits us on the mental level, and then it doesn't manifest in the physical level. So we'll look a lot at that. I'm not going to talk about Trimshamsha today, but we have done it. Look a little bit at, we have a couple lessons on the D20, which is spirituality and worship. You know, it's in the D5, which is another spirituality chart. You know, it's a fascinating subject. Most people who are into Vedic astrology are into spiritual practice and enlightenment and Ishtadevatas and all those things. And we'll have a couple lessons on that, and then we'll have some summary lessons. Actually, I have about 15 lessons planned, but I think I listed 13 of them here. The early bird price on this is $395. It goes up to $495 after the 16th. The course will start in 2 weeks from today. That's on February 21st. And if you need a payment plan, you can email me and we can set something up. Most people have credit cards or, you know, PayPal credit or something, and they can kind of do their own payment plans. But if you don't, I can work something out with you. Okay, so I want to start a little bit talking about ancestral karma. Mark Wolin, what a wonderful book it's called. It Didn't Start With You. And there are 3 key points from the book that I wanted to mention. One is what's called inherited trauma is biologically passed down through generations. So what happens is unresolved trauma from our parents and grandparents, even great parents, can be, you know, transmitted through our genes. And even though it doesn't seem like in this lifetime that we are dealing with some trauma from our childhood, somehow we've inherited some pattern. I mean, for example, my dad was a Holocaust survivor. When the Nazis invaded Poland, he hid out and it was, you know, for about 3 months escaping the Nazis and hiding in farmhouses. And he was always very uncomfortable when we traveled to foreign places. You know, he was always worried about something. And it's very funny, even though, you know, kind of I've inherited that pattern from him. I'm just, you know, I had to do some healing on it, but I just would feel very uncomfortable driving, and it's still a little bit uncomfortable going to new places and that I don't know anything about. And I often do a lot of research to feel comfortable, but you know, we just inherited, you know, fears and depression and symptoms from our descendants. And you know, it's kind of in our DNA, and it kind of, you can kind of start to see it in the astrology, and so we'll have talk about it. There's Mark One also talked about how important it is to make peace with parents and ancestors, to break the inherited traumas. On some level, our ancestors are still you know, are there. You can talk to them. They're kind of looking out for us. Sometimes they even, you know, can pass on guidance to us, like guardian angels. And it's really important to honor them. One of my teachers even says to, you know, we have this tradition that we don't know if we go to the cemetery and we put flowers by a person's grave. And one of my spiritual teachers was saying that on a subtle level, when we offer flowers to our ancestors, they can actually feel the subtle energy and love that we bring. It's quite fascinating. So actually, I started having a picture of my parents in my home, and I always put fresh flowers in front of them since I can't really go to the cemetery in Chicago very often. But it's very nice to kind of honor our ancestors, and it's very important. We can kind of understand ancestral karma in the charts. First of all, those of you who studied Boudica with me, Boudica is these kind of hidden karmic energies connected to in the dual signs, which are Sagittarius, Gemini, Virgo, and Pisces. The seventh house, which would be the opposite of, you know, these are going to be Jupiter, Mercury axes. You know, represent Boudica houses. So if you're a Pisces rising, then Virgo is a Boudica house. If you're Virgo rising, then Pisces is a Boudica house. So those are the Boudica signs. But there's an ancestral energy there. In movable signs, the Boudica house is the 11th house. So if you're Libra rising, the Boudica house is Leo. We all studied this before. In the fixed signs, Boudica house is the 9th house. So if you're Scorpio rising like I am, the Boudica house is Cancer. But anyway, they're different. So the Boudica signs can also be revealing for ancestral karma. We can also look at the sun or the moon, just having them in Aries or Scorpio in the D1 or the D9 can indicate some ancestral karma. Some of my teachers suggest it represents ancestral anger. Again, Mars sign, moon in a Mars sign, sun or Mars and moon. So sometimes there's some. So basically, if there's ancestral anger, we have to kind of, you know, do things to kind of appease it. So like if you had Capricorn rising with moon in Scorpio, there would be ancestral anger on the maternal side, connected to the moon. Aries rising with sun in Aquarius would create paternal ancestral anger. So there's these kind of interesting combinations that we don't think about. If you have the Lord of the 6th and the 4th, or the 9th, or the Lord of the 4th and the 9th, or the 12th, you know, there's also some ancestral karma that you have to deal with. You know, in the Jewish tradition, we have this idea of Yartzeit, which means the time of year where you light a candle when your parents died to kind of honor them with some light. And I said, you know, if you look at traditions all around the world, the Chinese and the Japanese, they have these huge, you know, Chinese, if you study Chinese culture, I mean, they're hugely into ancestors and ancestral karma. It's very, very important. And sometimes in the charts we can see if there's ancestral karma connected to Saturn and we've forgotten to do rituals for them. We're supposed to kind of honor them on a regular basis. If If there's a problem with Mars, maybe there's anger because the rituals are not performed. If Rahu's involved, maybe there's some wrong actions not involved. So we'll look at that more closely at some point. So again, it's very important to honor your ancestors. You can see ancestors in the natal chart, in the D1 chart. The 9th from the 9th, or the 5th house is your grandfather. The 9th from the 5th is your great-grandfather. You know, so you can kind of rotate the trines, the trinal houses in the D1 to see your grandfathers and great-grandfathers, and then you can do the same thing with grandmothers and great-grandmothers from the 4th house. The 4th from the 4th is the 7th, that's the grandmother. The 4th from the 7th is the 10th, is the great-grandmother. So the Kendras, you know, can show you paternal lineage there. I thought it was interesting. I was looking at my D12 this morning. It's down here in the corner. And it's Sagittarius rising with Jupiter in the 5th. In Varga charts, we always look at the rising sign and where the rising lord is placed, and then, you know, how that's connected. So what we see here is, you know, Sagittarius is a kind of a religious sign of the zodiac, more than any other sign. And my ancestors were Orthodox Jews, and so I thought that was fascinating that it was Sag rising with Jupiter in the 5th, and 5th house is kind of a spiritual house also. So it's kind of a spiritual lineage here in my D12, and again, my family was, you know, was kind of didn't survive from the Holocaust. Most of them were killed, grandparents and, you know, uncles and aunts and things like that. And it's interesting that the lord of the chart, Jupiter, is Mars rather, and it's in the 12th house. But what's interesting, when you look at mother and father in the D12, you often look at the 4th and the 9th houses. And what I was fascinated is that my mother, when I ran her chart, she was a Pisces rising. And isn't it interesting? I don't know if this always works, but it just suddenly it just dawned on me. My mother's a Pisces rising, and the 4th house, the 4th sign in my D12 is Pisces. Now, my mother had a very difficult life. She was forced to leave Poland before the Holocaust began and ended up escaping to Cuba and reuniting with her mother, who had abandoned her 12 years earlier. But, you know, we've got this debilitated Mercury here, and debilitated in the sun here. And she never really got to be with her father. Her father also she was raised by her grandparents, and she probably had a deep longing to be with her father, with that Rahu Sun connection, and just really almost never saw him. And I never met him. He was in New York. He'd come to the United States in the 20s, and then I never got to visit him or meet him. And she, you know, in those days when you're poor, you just don't travel. And so she finally saw him after many years, you know, maybe a couple of years before he died, but, you know, I never met him. My dad, who's a Taurus rising, you know, notice we've got Venus in here in Leo, and he's a very sweet Venus-oriented person. So I thought that was kind of interesting, looking at that. Just, you know, again, we can look at all the houses in the D12, but the core houses that you look at in D12 are the 12th house, because it's connected to the 12th house of the zodiac. It's connected to the 12th. The D12 is connected to the 12th house, and then the 4th and the 9th houses. The 12th house is kind of a completion point from the past before you were born. So it's kind of what happens in the 12th house is kind of our final desire. And so then that gets manifest in our parents in the next lifetime. And the 6th house in the is connected to our debt to our ancestors, how individuals use their intelligence to overcome ancestral karma. And what's interesting about my chart is I'm looking even at the D1 here. I've got Mars in Aries, and when I've done a lot of past life studies through people who are adept at that, it turns out that my brothers and I and my dad were all warriors together in in past armies, and my dad was a general, and my one of my younger brothers killed me in friendly fire, and so it's interesting, and I think my older brother has Mars in Aries also, and so we kind of, there's this kind of interesting ancestral karma being worked out from this past warrior army life. Anyway, it's kind of interesting. Of course, the moon and the sun are the most important in the D12, again, my dad's son, who's kind of religious, is also in Pisces, and my moon, the moon in my chart here, in my D4 is where it's in Virgo with K2 and Saturn. Again, my mom had an extremely difficult life. She actually, I was a latchkey kid. She had to go to work when I was about 7, and that was unusual in the 50s. But the kind of this workaholism with Moon K2 Saturn here is kind of interesting. Just really a good person, but just very, very, very difficult life. The D40 and the D45 are always abstract to kind of teach and work with, but sometimes if you know your grandparents and great-grandparents, you can kind of figure out something. So the D40 is connected to, it's usually considered good auspicious karma from your mother's line of ancestors. And, ancestral lines can go back, 14, 15 years sometimes, and you can trace them. And the D45, which is 9 times 5, becomes 9th house for father, becomes the ancestral lineage for the father. And notice again, my dad, my ancestral lineage has Jupiter in Pisces for teachers, and Digbala, Mercury has Digbala here, even if it's kind of debilitated. And I think I wouldn't read into the debilitation here, but I do know my dad's ancestors, have a long line of religious scholars and rabbis and Orthodox Jews who are studying, Judaism, and so it's kind of inherited in my dad's lineage here very strongly, and I think it gives me a lot of teaching brilliance. Also, it was inherited from my dad's lineage. My mom's family, I don't really know that much about. I barely saw my grandmother, even though she lived, 4 or 5 blocks away when I was growing up. There are all kinds of family squabbles, but again, we have Aries rising with Mars and Saturn in the 2nd house, suggesting kind of deep family tensions, I know my grandmother was involved in my grandfather moved to New York in the 20s, to make a better life for his family, and he couldn't bring his wife and daughter with, and his wife, which is my maternal grandmother, was lonely, and she had an affair with somebody in the village, which was kind of unheard of in Jewish families in those days. And the word got back to him, and he divorced her from the United States. In the meantime, she kind of escaped with this man that she was in love with, and they went to Cuba and left my mom with my mother's father's parents, and she was raised by them. But there's this, I don't really know that much about my maternal lineage, but I know it's kind of a mess just looking at this chart, But K2 and Rahu in the 12th here. But it's kind of interesting. And again, trying to, to unearth this stuff kind of, there are ways to do it. And when sometimes I have to have people, read, the Akashic records to see what kind of lives are involved in people's karma and ancestral karma. And you actually can see it in the, in these D40 and D45 charts, but to translate into English becomes kind of tricky. Okay, let's look at the Dreshana. Again, I don't know why it's pronounced with an S, Dreshana. It's a very, very important chart. We did a whole course on Navamsha a few years back, and Dreshana really deserves a whole course because it's so important. And I hope to, definitely do at least 3 lessons this time, and maybe 4, because it's a very, very important chart. There's a lot of things that we can do with it. We can talk about siblings. We can talk about health quite a bit. It's very connected to health. Connected to, there are 2 or 3 ways to calculate the Dreshana. There's one called the Somanath Dresha, which is about your sexuality. And that's always kind of, so I haven't taught that in the past. I'm hoping to look at that in this course. And these are ways to calculate the Dreshana. On some level, with the Dreshana, what we learned in the Varga class is that every Varga chart has a core house and a core planet. So Dreshana is connected to, obviously, the 3rd house. The 3rd house is siblings. It's also courage, entrepreneurial energy. I don't like to use the word communication for 3rd house, but it's 3rd sign of the zodiac is Gemini. But Dreshana has a lot to do with health, with sexual drive, with protecting one's territory. I'll give you guys, for those of you who haven't studied my houses, we'll send you my tape on the 3rd house. But Mars is the key planet in the Dreshana, and becomes the pivotal house to examine. Who owns the 3rd house in the D1 and where that moves to in the D3 becomes important, and we'll see that when I give you an example from my chart. There's a lot of things we could do with the houses in the Dreshana. Again, the 1st house, which we always look at in Vargas, is connected to well-being of our siblings, and it also shows our initial drive in life because it's connected. 3rd house is connected to courage, the courage to move forward. Sometimes this, the 2nd house can be a loss of courage, even, or gains from your siblings. But they're all kind of interesting houses. We'll go through that in more detail. But here's my Dreshana. And that was kind of interesting. First of all, the chart lord Mars is in Leo, which suggests they have a lot of strength and courage. In fact, I did. People are kind of amazed what I did in creating all my businesses. Just having a lot of entrepreneurial energy, and it kind of shows up here with Mars and Leo in the 10th here, having strong Dikbala. But what's also interesting is my the 3rd house, which is about siblings, and Mars is the core Karaka. The 3rd house Lord Saturn is in the 8th with K2, and particularly younger brother is kind of 3rd house in the Rashi chart. And my younger brother and I didn't talk to each other for about 20 years because I was holding on to. I'd found out, from some past life reading that we were soldiers together, and he had killed me in friendly fire, or maybe he was angry at me, and I never quite forgave him or let him in this lifetime, and I didn't know why. And I wouldn't let in his kids. He had 4 nieces and nephews, and I didn't really let them in for a long time. I finally did some healing on this, and we're very close now. But see, look how Saturn is in the 8th house of kind of past karma with K2, past life karma. So it's very kind of strong energy here with my younger brother, and I thought that's kind of interesting. We can also see a lot of health stuff there, but we'll go back to that later. Traditionally, the D3 is used to look at whether you will have siblings or the state of the health. Now, I don't know if we ever really look at somebody's charts to see if, I mean, you know, do you ever get a 10-year-old who is wondering if he's going to have any brothers and sisters? So that never really happens. But, you know, I obviously, you know, the chart Lord Mars is in a male sign in the 10th house where it has Digbala. You know, I have 2 brothers, and so a lot of strong male energy. And it turns out in our lineage, we seem to have more, you know, my younger brother, who's had a lot of grandchildren, have predominantly tended to be boys. So it's interesting. Anyway, but all that stuff is kind of intriguing. And there's ways you can count in the Dreshana. You can count the 3rd house is your younger sibling, the 5th is the 2nd youngest, the 7th is the 3rd youngest. So you have like 11 siblings in the Garrett, you know. Which once in a while I get somebody who has 11 siblings, you know, or you can count them all in the Dreshana chart. You know, you have to include losses and miscarriages. So in general, in the D3, we look at Mars for courage. We look at Saturn, which can show disease and its karka for illness. Where does it go to in the D3? It goes to my 8th house. So that's not really great for health for me. What house, what sign, what body part. So sometimes, like, look at Michael Jackson's chart. Gemini rising, he's got Mercury in the 3rd, but in the 2nd house of nourishment and nutrition, he's got Saturn in Cancer. So Cancer specifically is a sign about nurturing and nourishment, and Saturn in the 2nd is depriving nurturing and nourishment. So one might turn to drugs and things like, and alcohol and things like that. But it's kind of interesting that he does have Saturn in the Dreshana here in the 2nd house. We can look at different body parts for injuries in the 2nd house. We'll have to spend maybe a whole lesson on that from the Ayurvedic course. And there's a special, the 8th house in the Dreshana is very important, and the sign owning the 8th house is very important, called the 22nd Dreshana, which is often used to chart special illnesses and diseases and accidents and things like that. When I look at the Robert Kennedy's Dreshana, Robert Kennedy, of course, was assassinated in 1968, but he and President Kennedy were very close, and he was the Attorney General during the Kennedy administration, and he went after the mafia, and you know, was really kind of hard on crime, and I don't know if he was well liked for that. But what's interesting, okay, if we analyze his Dreshana, okay, it's Leo rising, Sun's in the 4th, got Venus and Jupiter in the 1st. So the Lord of the 3rd, which is the Karaka house for the D3, Venus is in the 1st house with Jupiter and Leo. So it kind of shows that the brothers were very close, and Robert and John were very close. You know, it was certainly an incredible tragedy when John was killed. What's also interesting is Mars, the Karaka for, we always look at the Karaka, which is this, you know, the Karaka for brothers is Mars, and it's the Karaka for courage, and it's the Karaka for the 3rd house, it's the Karaka for the Dreshana. It's in Aquarius, a negative sign, a rather enemy sign, and it's a Marika house. So again, his brother was kind of killed. That actually happened during his Jupiter period, and Jupiter is the Lord of the 8th, which is the 22nd Dreshana, which is often an indication of kind of tragedy. And that when Robert went into his Jupiter period and activated the 22nd Dreshana, his brother was killed. You know, one of the techniques that we learned in Varga charts is kind of this Baba Sushika technique. So the third lord, which, you know, for you know, the third house for brothers, is Mercury. And Mercury, um, when we transpose it to, when we transpose the Lord to the Dreshana, goes into the 12th house here, in the Dreshana house, for kind of loss of brother. So that's, you know, it's, there are all kinds of fun things you can do with Vargas. We learned some of those techniques. We have to continue practicing them. Okay. Like I said, we have to spend a lot of time with Dreshana and health, and there's a couple different systems for that, but there's a couple different ways. There's multiple ways to do Dreshanas just by the number of degrees. Western astrologers look at the cantas, which are the first 10 degree, every 10 degrees of the Rashi sign, but there are ways in the Ayurvedic astrology class, which we'll pull some information from. You know, we can look at how different parts of the body are connected in the Dreshana, and when you have a health problem, you can often see a tendency for it to happen because of a malefic connected to that Dreshana part. Okay, so that's Dreshana. Again, it's a fascinating topic. I think I'm going to try to pause for some questions just real quickly here before we go deeper in the talk. If you're on the panelist line because you're a student, I will unmute everybody, but if you can't take the mic, you can type a question in chat. If you're a student of mine, you know how to use GoToWebinar, and you can mute your mic and ask a question. Oh.
For your grandparents, how do you differentiate between your maternal grandfather and your maternal grandfather?
Yeah, well, obviously you start with the mother. And so the fourth from the fourth is going to be your mother's mother, and the fourth from her mother is the fourth from there. So you kind of keep rotating. And with grandparents, you rotate the trinal houses. So your ninth house is your father, the ninth from the ninth is your grandfather, the ninth, which is your fifth, the ninth from your great grandfather, from your grandfather, his father's 9 from there. So that's how you can rotate it just in the D1. And then you can start looking at the owners of those houses, you know, in the D12 and in the D45 and 50 and 40. Yeah, kind of fascinating. Yeah, good question.
Hi, Barry.
Hi.
Hi. Just, kind of follow up on the question Debbie had. So the process will be identify the role in the D1 and then figure out the ruler planet and then go seek answers in D12. Is
Well,
that correct?
yeah, you can look at it in D12 and D40 and D45. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's kind of it helps when you know more about your you know a little bit more. And like I said, I have just this work is so important. I mean, I try, when you study this in Vedic astrology, people don't know very much, but I've done classes in ancestral karma, and I worked with the Hellinger Institute, and there's just fascinating ways to heal this work. I mean, I was in a workshop put out by the Hellinger Foundation, and they look at and it's totally amazing. It was, it's an experiential thing, but when it starts out that you have some problem, you don't even need to talk about your parents or your grandparents or anybody, and let's say you have a problem with gaining weight or something like that, and that's your intention, and you pick out people from the audience to play your parents and your grandparents and your siblings, and then you arrange them on a chessboard, like, the mother and father aren't talking to each other, the grandparents are way off to the side because they left or something. And then the Hellinger person goes around and interviews the people on the chessboard, and then she sometimes will move them. And what happens is all this because I've played the parts, and you start feeling these, what's the mother feeling and what's the father feeling, or and this kind of magic happens. And anyway, we would have these things where you'd find out where this ancestral problem was connected to the fact that the grandmother didn't marry the love of her life because he died in the war, and she married some man that she really didn't want to, and she's kind of still, she couldn't be there on so many levels because the love of her life died. All this stuff would get revealed. We did one for my Holocaust family, and it was just astounding what happened. And the man who was playing my father, the person walked up to them and said, "What's the father feeling?" And the father, my dad, or the person playing my dad, just went on the floor and started crying for 10 minutes, and was just unbelievably, out of control. And my dad was a workaholic, and he never really showed any emotion around what had happened to him. And in this process, all this ancestral pain was getting released. It was just amazing. Anyway, that's why ancestral karma is so interesting to me, because this, you can see little patterns in the D, in the charts, but and it's so, but I'm more interested in teaching you that, how important it is for honoring ancestors and healing relationships and things like that. So anyway. That's what I bring into it, to my stuff. Most people don't do that, but that's who I am, Okay,
Yeah.
good question, Emma.
Thank you.
Other questions, answers? Okay. And I'm talking about my chart, mostly because I can do, I know it better. So, I mean, we could bring Donald Trump in, and we know some of his family history, and he's a pretty public guy, and you can see things too, but it's, I don't know. Okay, so one of the things that we have to do in Varga 2, which we didn't get to do in Varga 1, is that we have to talk about what's called divisional strength. Sometimes you get a lot of planets that are Vargotama. Parashara has, all this information about how to calculate divisional strength, and it's very important. And the computers do it automatically now. And there's a whole all these mathematics to it, and you can see a lot of things. And sometimes you can see that maybe a divisional strength will manifest in a particular dasha, or there's certain yogas in the Varga chart that will manifest things. So this is called, a lot of this is studied in Shodasha Varga, which is, some of the key Varga charts that we look at this. But one of the things that I'll show this, one of the things that we look at, here's Bill Clinton's chart, and this is the Virgo rising chart, which is pretty much accepted, and I finally decided that's the right one. He's big in the news at the moment as he testifies. But here's, look at this. When we look at the Shodasha Varga and the divisional placement, we find, look how many, look at his sun in all the divisional charts. He's D1 Leo, D2 Leo, D3 Leo, D7 Leo, D9 Aries exalted, D10 Leo, D12 for parents Virgo, nothing there, D16 for vehicles Virgo, nothing there, still a friend sign, D30 Aries, D60 Capricorn, great enemy. But so for the most part, there's all this hidden strength, because in the Varga charts there's so much Leo repeating for the sun and exalted. So I mean, he was a great leader. And one of the things you have to do is you have to look in the divisional charts sometimes to see these kind of hidden strengths. Like I have, like my Venus is not, it's in Capricorn, it's actually in a Parivartana Yoga with Saturn. It actually goes into the 12th house, its own sign. But my Venus is kind of troubled in many ways, but when we look at my Varga charts, it's my strongest planet. So it has all this hidden strength, which actually, shows my creativity and artistic nature that, it's just, you wouldn't see it if you didn't examine the division, looking for the sense. This is something we didn't do in Varga 1, we need to do in Varga 2. For example, a colleague of mine did an analysis of some very important people, including, all these very famous people. And she found out that, they all did well in their Venus periods, and like Venus had 7 out of 10 strong placements in the division for Bill Gates, Michael Jordan 5 out of 10 for Venus in his divisional charts, Queen Elizabeth 5 out of 10, Marlon Brando 8 out of 10. So, and they all had really good Venus periods. So sometimes when we're looking to decide if the period is going to be successful, the Varga charts will, if they have a lot of hidden strength, they will reveal something that you wouldn't normally see. And we'll see that next week in my D1, about my Varga 1 class. We're studying the D60. We can look at the Shashtiamsha deity, and it will tell us whether the period's going to be good or bad, if it's a benefic or malefic deity. And we have to look at, that's very important. And we'll be studying that next week for those of you who are in that class. The final class is next week. Here's Michael Jordan's chart. Now, Michael Jordan's chart is kind of fascinating. It's Aries rising. Michael Jordan was probably the best basketball player ever for the Chicago, and he was for the Chicago Bulls, and just a king. And what's fascinating is that he has debilitated Mars. What's wrong with that picture? This is what happens if you don't look at Varga charts, right? Should be in Capricorn Navamsha, which where it's exalted in the Navamsha chart. But if I remember, I have to maybe again, it's right on the edge there, but I'm pretty sure 16. Pretty sure it's Capricorn Navamsha. But anyway, his Venus period was very good. He's going, even though Venus is in the 9th house here, it's in its own nakshatra, so that's kind of a good thing. It is Lord of the 2nd and the 7th, so it's usually kind of a mark or a health problematic planet, but it's in the 9th. It's got all this Varga strength in all the Varga charts, and so his career really took off during his Venus period. So we always look for a strong repetition in many Vargas. Here's a very famous saint, Ramakrishna. Very famous saint. He's Aquarius rising with Moon, Sun, and Mercury in the 1st house. He was kind of an ascetic. One of the things that we always study about his chart is Aquarians have trouble with their mothers or with food or with nurturing. And even though Lord of the 6th is in the 1st, he did have that kind of a huge issue. It still made him an incredible saint, but he's kind of exalted Venus here. But that's the one thing I remember about his life. But his when we look at his Saturn is of course exalted here in the 9th house. Saturn is, particularly when it's exalted, is one of the more spiritual planets. Debilitated Saturn is very material. Exalted Saturn can be very spiritual because it's the oldest planet, it's the wisest planet. And when we look at his Varga placements, 10 of the 16 Saturn placements are very strong. Saturn in the D1, Saturn is exalted. The D3, it's in Aquarius. The D4, it's in Capricorn. D7, it's in Capricorn. D9 is in Aquarius. D10 is in Aquarius. D20 is in Capricorn. and D60, which again is, we've learned is a very important chart that we can read alone, is also in its own sign. So incredible strength for the chart lord, and it's in the 9th house, and the 9th house lord. Venus is exalted in Saturn's nakshatra. So there's all these kind of wonderful spiritual energies here. And he was a very enlightened saint. Okay. Brings us to the D20. Another fascinating chart. Last time I taught it was in the spiritual astrology class, and we'll have at least 2 lessons on it. I'm kind of fascinated by it because my key interest is mantras and spiritual practice and gurus and all that stuff. I mean, that's just who I am. The D20 shows spiritual inclinations and blocks to spiritual practice. The trinal house has become important here. The 6th house is key for showing blocks on the spiritual path. So you need a strong 6th house in your D20, otherwise you have trouble with meditation or you're not disciplined about it. The 9th house tells us about the nature of our guru and our relationship and shows us the depth of devotion. The 5th house tells us the deity to worship and stuff like that. So a lot of fun things you can do to increase your spirituality by studying the D20. Again, we can go into more detail here. The core house of the D20 is the 8th house. Again, the 8th house, as I've taught before, is not just a horrible house of accidents and divorce. It's a very spiritual house of meditation because it's actually about transcending into the subtle level of existence. The D20 we know is the 8th house is important because again we take 20 minus 12 and we get 8 as the remainder. So it's the 8th house becomes the key house, which is about liberation, moksha in modern practice. We also have to look at the Atmakarika in the D20 to see if it's strong, and that's very important to look at. Of course, you need a strong lagna in the D20 to have interest in spirituality. You don't want Rahu or Mars there unless there's a lot of dignity. Anyway, we'll study this in detail. It's really kind of a fascinating house. As the 5th house, we can look at the deities to study, and very kind of interesting chart. So here's my D20. Now I studied this in detail with Robert Koch, and in Sanjay's tradition, he reminds us that actually debilitated planets are better in the D20. So notice I have a debilitated Mercury, and I have a debilitated Jupiter, and the Atmakarika is exalted here in the 8th house. So why are debilitated planets good in the D20? And that's because it takes, to get enlightened, you have to not have very much ego, you kind of have to be devoted to the guru and just kind of surrender. And I have kind of Jupiter with Ketu, and that does indicate devotion, and I think the debilitation supports surrender. Rahu's there also, but Rahu and Ketu are always together in the upper divisional charts, and we have to have a talk about that sometime. The problem, of course, Mars has his own sign in Aries here, so there may be too much ego. I know how to do it better than my teacher, so there's always a kind of a play happening here, but a lot of good spiritual happenings here. 5th Lord is the moon, suggesting, and it's exalted in the 3rd house. Might suggest more devotion to Devi. Moon is also connected to Shiva a little bit too, but there's Vaishya Devata is actually Shiva, and that's something that we'll study in the spiritual astrology course, and that's in the Karakamsha chart. But anyway, that's kind of all interesting. Okay, Got all kinds of other things I could do, but I actually I don't want to do too much sometimes because these classes can get, yeah.
One question. Can you say something about Rahu Ketu conjunction in the Varga chart? What does it mean in general?
Yeah, it just means there's a lot of karma. It's just the way the calculations work in the upper the way the calculations work in the upper Varga charts is that Rahu and Ketu always are together, and it just, whatever sign or house they're in and what other planets are connected with, it just means there's a lot of past life karma there. So with my Rahu and Ketu conjunct Jupiter is that I have a lot of past life karma with former gurus, you know, that needs to kind of get worked out.
Okay, thank you.
We don't always know what it is. I mean, in the Rahu and Ketu class, sometimes we can tell by sign, we can tell by, you know, Rahu and Capricorn is more like workaholism or savaholic martyrdom maybe. But, you know, sometimes we can tell, and I do, you know, I just have been very, you know, I did 20, 30, 40 years of seva for my guru. So, I mean, that was definitely kind of Rahu and Capricorn. So sometimes we can tell by sign and house. Yeah.
So it means always it's bad karma, or it could be also good karma?
It could be good karma. I mean, in my case, it's with Jupiter, and so Rahu, you know, we know Jupiter is the only planet that really, well, Jupiter is the planet that does best with Rahu and Ketu, so it makes it more sattvic. So yeah, I mean, if you have malefics, if you have it with Mars and it's debilitated in Cancer, it might be more problematic. But you know, in my case, it's with Jupiter, and it's you know, it's helping Rahu and Ketu.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Other questions? So I want to again, this material is always endless. I just wanted to give you a taste of what Varga 2 is about. Some of my Varga 1 students aren't sure if they want to take it yet. I think it's quite fascinating. A bunch of people have signed up. Again, when you get the replay link for the class, there'll be a link to sign up for the class. The early bird is $395. I just looked at it. It was showing $495. I asked my manager, office assistant to fix it. If it's not fixed, then just email me and I'll make sure I'll get it fixed. But the early bird, which is good until the 16th, which is a week from Monday, is $395. After that, the price goes up to $495. Again, it's going to be about 15 lessons. So that's going to go about 4 months. So it'll probably go through February to March to April. It'll probably be over by mid-June, before summer break. The next lesson, the next live lesson will be in 2 weeks on February 21st. If you need a payment plan, you can email me at call that. Okay, so you can email me at my personal email if you need a payment plan or if you have any questions about the class. But it's quite fascinating. For those of you who study with me, do you want to get on the mic and share your experience with me as a teacher for the people who don't know me?
Okay, this is Debbie, and I'll go.
Okay, thank you.
This is my first class that I have taken with Barry, and I am probably a lot less experienced than maybe a lot of others of you. I really only began my astrology studies during the COVID, and I haven't taken a lot of classes, and I don't really give professional readings. But I found Barry's style to be very easy to understand and very patient. So if you have any concerns that maybe I won't understand this, or maybe I don't have the foundation, I want to assure you that that won't be an issue, because if I can do it, so can you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. That's great. Thank you. Anybody else of my current students who would like to share anything? Or past?
I can. Oh,
Go ahead. Who's on the line?
after you go ahead first.
Okay. I've been with Barry for 10 years, and I find, just like Debbie said, his style is very supporting. He has a lot of knowledge, and he provides a lot of information. I've had classes with other teachers. You feel very supported by Barry. And no question is a stupid question. If he doesn't know the answer, he'll go find it and provide you with the answers. And teaching is very practical. And plus, he uses your chart during the class, which most people learn better than maybe some hypothetical historical individual, because you know yourself much better and you learn a lot faster that way. I highly recommend taking the class with Barry.
Thank you, Effie. Yeah, I do like to bring in people's charts in the class because actually it helps me understand them better, and they can see things that I can't see sometimes. But it also, I know in my studies when my teachers have done that, I mean, the lights go on. Oh my God, I've got Jupiter and Ketu in the Karakamsa, Rashi chart in the first house. My God, I'm a spiritual teacher and Jyotish teacher, So it's like, sometimes the light, you see things when you, it's very nice to get these flashes.
Also, I wanted to add that he is very humble as well. So you don't see a whole lot of ego. Very helpful in a teacher.
Thank you, Effie. Yeah. I don't know. I think humility saves me. I don't know. There's a downside to it too. I don't go out there boasting, I'm the best teacher and you have to take my classes because there's no one better than me, but to sell yourself, sometimes you have to do that. And I just don't do that. So it's a problem. Okay. Emma, you wanted to share something?
Oh yeah, sure. I want to echo like all the points that everyone is saying, and also I want to just stress how generous Barry is. Like he will just share everything he knows. You can always trust him to, like if you have a question or you need a resource, he will always, like so generous to share everything he knows. And a lot of times I feel bad. I was like, do we really deserve this? Because a lot of Jyotish concept, if you don't have a guru or teacher to tell you, it's really hard for you to research and really find out yourself. I just found Barry's class so helpful, and also I just love the community that he cultivated, throughout years of teaching. Everyone is very knowledgeable and nice. I guess because Barry, I don't know, like internally, he's a really nice and sweet person. So all his students, for whatever reason, are very supportive and kind to each other, and everyone, read each other's chart. And, it's just like a really lovely energy, I would say, like flow through the astrology community that Barry holds. So I highly recommend taking Barry's class, not this one, but like any topics that you're curious, like you should really check out his class. And also the materials is just abundance. I'm still kind of going through like previous classes. It's just every time I see it's just like new findings. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for Barry.
Oh, thank you, Emma. That's great. Yeah, and I should note that if you go to my website, appliedvedicastrology.com, if you click under courses, there's probably 40 courses that I've taught over the last 10 years, that are what I call them in the CAN version. So, you can study them on your own. They're all quite good, and you get all the notes from the PowerPoints. And a lot of people do self-study because I haven't taught this class since 2019, so it's 7 years later, and I sometimes rotate things, and I probably won't teach this again just because I don't know the way the world is changing, but it's the last chance to get Varga too. And I even teach these classes sometimes because I need to remember all these things. Jyotish is kind of like an encyclopedia, and Sue McKean, a good friend of mine, is fond of saying that Jyotish is like the dew on the morning, buds. The sun comes out and the dew's gone real quickly, so you have to keep refreshing your brain around it. So it's really kind of quite nice. Okay. Anybody else want to share anything?
Hi there, it's me, Alice. I'd like to share a little, if that's okay.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, I just want to say, yeah, it's so true. Barry's very generous in his information. And, he shares it in the context of living in the Western world, meaning it's very relatable, and you can really apply it to your life or whoever you're working with or studying, because we don't live in, in India, we don't live in another culture. So it's very applicable to how we're living now. And it's not to say that the other cultures are not relevant, they are relevant, but for us living here, it makes more sense to me. Especially I've been taking, his financial astrology, which is really mind blowing. I really enjoy that one.
Okay.
I have an affinity for numbers, so I'm just absorbing that one like a sponge. So I just, really recommend Barry. And as everyone said, he's very humble. You feel safe asking him questions. You don't have to feel intimidated, or is this a dumb question, or I don't get it. Just ask him. He'll be happy to answer it. So I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Yeah, it's kind of like when we train dogs, we say there are no bad dogs, but there's no bad questions either. All questions are very relevant. Yeah. Okay. Other comments, questions?
Barry, if we're taking this class, would it help if we have the charts of our family members, our parents, our grandparents, our children?
Yes. Again, ancestral karma is probably going to be 3 weeks at most, maybe 4 weeks, something like. Probably sometime. I think family charts are fascinating to look at as a whole. I mean, often when I have to do readings, I ask for people's children's charts or their parents' charts. You can only see so much information in a Varga chart or in a house or something. I mean, but when you look at, people often ask very specific questions about a parent's health and stuff like that. I think it's, but when you look at family charts together, you see these patterns. Like, my brother has Mars in Aries also, and we were kind of warrior buddies together, I see somebody has married, they've got, Venus in the 7th in Taurus, and they marry, somebody with, Venus in Taurus, So I think it's, and I was just showing you, to my surprise, and I hadn't noticed this before, that my mom and dad's chart, rising signs and, rising planets are in my D12, they're like, they're right there, so I think it's personally fulfilling to see family patterns in the charts when you look at them. Yeah. And if we, sometime if you want to share something that you find, like I said, a lot of Vedic astrology studies have to be self-analysis and self-inquiry, because I only know so much, but your family, and you can look at your family's charts and see the patterns. Yeah, definitely a good thing to do. Okay, other questions, other answers? Okay. Okay, let's go. Okay, so for my current students, the last lesson of Varga 1 on the D60 Shastyamsha chart will be next week, and we'll look at Muladasha, and we'll look at timing, and timing dashas and things with the Shastyamsha chart. So there's a lot to study that. For those of you who haven't done any homework on that yet, please study your Shastyamsha stuff. It's very fascinating. For those of you who want to continue with me and haven't signed up, email me and let me know. Again, Varga 2 will start 2 weeks from today. And if you're new to wanting to study Vargas with me, you're welcome. There's maybe 3 core tapes on Vargas and an article that you would need to read to maybe catch up and be ready for Varga 2. It's just understanding some of the basic, and one of those tapes is on YouTube. It's the introduction to Varga 1, and then there's a couple other tapes. So if you want to jump into Varga 2, there's just a couple tapes you need to make up, because you just have to know some of the core principles for studying Vargas that we studied in tapes maybe 2 through 4, and then those can apply to additional Varga charts. Okay, so I'm going to end early. It's unusual that I get to do that, but sometimes less is more. And so I will see you all in the future. And if you have any questions, email me. My personal email, swfort@gmail.com. Have a great week, and take care.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Goodbye. See you next week.
Yep.
Thanks.